Hi everyone, welcome back to Podcast Kids. Today I am joined by Julian, who is one of the most interesting people I know. There are so many topics I could interview him about, and I'm likely to do so again in the future to cover other areas of his interesting life. Apart from being a senior partner at Allen & Overy, one of the world's most prestigious law firms, he is also very passionate about cycling and is the perfect person to discuss how COVID has caused even the most reluctant peddler to find themselves on a saddle rather than behind the wheel. When I first met Julian, I was amazed to learn that he had cycled 6,000 kilometers from southwest England to Norway. Julian, thank you so much for being with us today. Please can you take a few moments to introduce yourself and also share with us some detail of this amazing journey?
Sure, and well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. So, my name is Julian Johansson. I am a partner at Allen & Overy, and what I do when I'm not lawyering is mostly cycling. So I enjoy spending early mornings and weekends on the bike on the cycle paths in and around Dubai.
Thank you, Julian. We'll start with the questions now. How many days did this take you? And also, can you please explain how you packed for such a journey? And I'm sure everyone is trying to understand where all your supplies go when you're on a bike.
Absolutely, yes. So the journey was in 2017, and it was, in the end, it was 69 days of riding. And I went from the southwest of England to the middle of Norway and back, camping along the way. Packing was interesting because I was leaving in April, and I knew I expected to be back sometime around the end of June. So I had to pack winter or cold weather gear and hot weather gear. And I couldn't pack too much. So I had to be very disciplined about gadgets, anything heavy. So I had to try and keep the weight to a minimum. But obviously you need change of clothes, you need dry clothes if it rains, you have to have everything waterproof, packed in waterproof bags. All of the electronic stuff like iPad, iPhone, spare battery, charger, camera, all of that stuff has to be kept absolutely waterproof. And of course, passport, money, and things like that have to be accessible. Supplies, good question. I had some basics with me all the time, like tea bags, instant coffee, salt, sugar, bit of rice, porridge oats. And then whenever I found food shops, and I spent a lot of time looking for food shops because I was getting through burning a lot of calories on the road. Whenever I found a food shop, I would stock up. But of course, I couldn't stock up with too much because for every pound or every kilo that you put in your bags, you've got to cycle it along the road and up the hills. So my biggest challenges were finding food and finding places to sleep.
You also own a farm in Derby. Can you tell us the difference in terms of cycling when you're at home in Dubai versus when you're in Derby? Do you use a different sort of bike when you are in Derby?
Well, I'm lucky enough to have more than one bike. So the bike that I did, the bike that I used for the Norway trip is an expedition bike. So it's a bit heavier, but it's over-engineered in order to carry heavy loads and to be reliable over a long distance. Back at home, I've got so on the farm I've got an old steel racer, which actually belongs to my wife, but it's big enough for me to ride. So that's a 1980s steel frame sort of old school bike, which is a lot of fun to ride. And then here in Dubai, I treated myself to a lightweight road bike, which I use on the cycle paths. That's the lightest and the quickest of the three bikes. And so I use whatever I've got where I am. And if the weather's really bad in the UK, and if it's dark and sort of wet, frozen out on the roads, and I don't want to be riding out, I'll actually put the expedition bike on rollers in the garage and then just pedal on the rollers, which is a very old-fashioned way of training, but actually very good for your technique.
By any chance, did you buy your road bike from Cycle Hub? That's where my dad bought his.
Actually, I got it from Wolfies. That my choices were basically Cycle Hub or Wolfies, and I knew Wolfies from before. So I just went in to have a look and see what they had, and as it happened, they had exactly the kind of thing I was looking for. So I was happy to go with them.
Okay. Before COVID, I didn't know how to ride a bike, so whenever my family would go for a bike ride, I would be the one missing out. Well, I didn't really feel like I was missing out because I didn't think it was a sport which I would enjoy as much as something like football or basketball. Mm-hmm. But then I finally decided one afternoon in March that I actually had to change this. I decided to change it. But ever since then, I've been cycling every weekend. I'm sure we will continue after COVID. But my question for you is, why do you think everyone all of a sudden is out there on their bicycles?
That's a really good question, and I'm glad to hear that you've taken cycling up. I would just comment on that by saying it's not obviously. It doesn't look from the outside to be a lot of fun, because it's just, you see people sitting on bicycles and you think, what's that about? But actually, once you get into it, and you really start to appreciate how it gets you from A to B, and it's quicker than running, and so you cover more ground and you get more you get more airflow, which keeps you relatively cool. I think for COVID, well, there's always been, certainly within the last 2, 3, 4 years in Dubai, there's been cycling's seen a lot of growth, and it's partly due to the quality of the infrastructure here with the cycle paths out at Al Qudra and at Al Maidan, which really helps because it takes cyclists off the road, and that's really important, because if you want to improve your times and do long distances, it's really nice not to have to worry about traffic. So I think the background is that cycling has, in recent years, been very popular in Dubai. But to your question, what difference has COVID made? Well, I can answer that from a personal perspective, because we were, as you know, we were all in lockdown. As it happened, when I went to the bike shop and I bought my bike, I didn't just buy a bike, I also bought an indoor trainer. So if you haven't seen one of those, they are, it's a great gadget where you can take off the back wheel of the bike and put the chain over a cog on the trainer, and the trainer connects through Bluetooth to your iPad, and then you can actually you just pedal the trainer and it will communicate how hard you're pedaling and how fast you're going to the iPad, and then you see it visually on a screen, and you can then ride with other people who are doing the same wherever they are in the world, and you can race them. So I couldn't train outside because we were all under lockdown, so I was doing that every evening, basically virtual cycling, and I was doing it in the kitchen, and on the kitchen work surface I had, in fact, I've got a fan which is trained on my face, and the bike is set up on this trainer, and I'm pedaling for an hour or 2 hours and doing my training that way. So that was transformative. And I tell you, if you go to any bike shop in Dubai now and you try and buy one of those smart trainers, you can't find them, because when COVID struck, those trainers were flying off the shelves and they completely ran out, because the whole cycling community just basically went online. So that's really my experience. And it's been, now what's really nice is, because the lockdown is sort of gradually lifting, the cycle tracks at Al Qudra and Al Maidan are now getting populated again. So you're seeing groups of riders and people going out, and there's a sense of almost back to normal kind of movement is getting going again, which is nice to see.
In fact, I was looking for one of the bikes where you just use indoors and the virtual ones that you bike virtually against other people. I was looking for one of those, but like you mentioned, it was sold out. They were sold out like completely. I couldn't find it
Yeah.
anywhere. So 3
Yeah,
days.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. But I mean, if you get the bike first, you can get the trainer later, because obviously, you know, when you've got the bike, you can use it. And when you can get a trainer, then in due course, you can just get one and use it when you have to indoors.
Yeah. 3 days ago, I had my first bike accident, and I'm still suffering from the fall I took. And
I'm sorry to hear that.
And I have not as yet tried to ride again, as my injuries are still fresh. So, what is the worst accident you have ever had on a bike, and what advice can you give to people to regain their confidence after a crash?
Excellent question. Okay. Well, the first piece of advice is always wear a helmet. Goes without saying. I never used to wear a helmet. I mean, I've been cycling since the 1970s, and nobody wore them back then, you know, 70s, 80s, and so on. But later on, I started wearing one, so I would always advise that. The worst accident, well, I think the worst accident I had was coming down Mont Ventoux, which is it's a famous mountain in the south of France, which is sometimes used for the Tour de France as one of the stages. And I'd ridden up, which took just over 2 hours, and then I rode down, and it's steep, and it's a long descent, and it's very steep, and I was going too fast and hit a corner, and couldn't control the bike and hit a car that was coming up the other way. That was in 2014. I was very, very lucky, because I hit the car, a sort of glancing blow, ended up on the road, but I was only superficially injured, so some cuts and bruises, a little bit of blood loss, but nothing broken. And the bike was okay, and so on. So, but that shook me up a bit. I basically managed to get home. But I think the advice I would give, apart from being careful and riding within your limits, is if you do fall off, get back on as soon as you can. It's a little bit like what they say about falling off a horse. The most important thing is to get back on, because if you don't, you'll always wonder whether you've got the confidence or not. So, be realistic. You will occasionally have accidents. They happen. If you wear a helmet and don't worry about it, these things happen. But hopefully, not too often and not too badly.
Yours sounded like quite a bad one. In fact, when I had mine, I was going downhill, and I was going downhill, and I sort of lost control of my bike, and then there was a car like parked on the side of, not on the side of the road. So there was the road, but then we have in our community something like next to the road, so it goes into the pavement where there's a car there, and then there's like grass next to it and the pavement. And so then I was going down. I was losing control, so I was like wiggling my bike, and because I didn't know I was going down normally, and I just lost balance. And then I had to like just slam brakes, and then so I didn't bash into the car, and then I just fell forward, and then my bike landed on me.
Oh yes, that sounds unpleasant. I hope you didn't break any bones, I trust.
No, I just have a cut, and then my left wrist is just a bit, because that's what I use my left wrist to break the fall.
So it's a bit sore because where it got bent back a bit. Yeah, I know I've done that in the past as well, and I hope your bike's okay.
Yeah, the bike is perfectly fine. Unlike team sports, cycling is a good way for people to move around safely, exercise, and keep sane. And at the same time, not break any social distancing rules by spending time outdoors. Do you think cities around the world should start preparing for cycle lanes to help turn this mode of transport from a temporary to a permanent measure?
definitely. There are some cities which are way ahead of others. So, for example, probably the best cities I've seen from the perspective of a cyclist are in the Netherlands. So all over the Netherlands, you'll find that for every road, you'll find alongside that road, there's a cycle path. It's usually separate from the road. And the cycle paths have got their own signposts and their own sort of road furniture, instructions, and so on. And so it's like a parallel universe. So you're riding along on the cycle path in Holland, in the Netherlands, and you'll see a signpost that tells you it's 20 kilometers to the next town or whatever. That signpost is just for you. Cars aren't reading it because the cars on the roads, they've got their own signposts. So it's like this kind of, they've basically created a separate world for cyclists on the road in the Netherlands. And another country that really stands out is Denmark. So if you're riding through Copenhagen, you'll see that there's a lane for cars, there's a lane for buses, and there's a lane for bicycles, and each one has its own set of traffic lights. That really impressed me. So there's a lot you can do, but bear in mind, obviously, some countries have got very particular challenges. So in the UAE, for example, the climate is not very friendly in summer for cycling. So it puts a lot of people off. If you think of some countries which are very hilly, it's also not very encouraging because many people don't like to ride up hills. But if you think of countries like the Netherlands and Denmark, they're both pretty flat. And so it encourages lots of people to use bikes. But you're right, I think there's a big future for cycling, and I think cycle lanes are absolutely vital. People should do what they can to encourage cycling within the limits of climate, culture, and topography, hills or flat countryside.
In fact, France has already committed to investing 20 million euros into more cycling infrastructure.
That's actually really good to hear. And I must say, and perhaps I should have mentioned France in a different context, I have always loved cycling in France. And I haven't spent that much time in France on cycle lanes. I've ridden mostly on the roads, but the French drivers I have found are always incredibly thoughtful and friendly. They give you lots of room and often give you lots of encouragement as well, because cycling is something of a national sport there. So it's good to hear that they're spending some money on the infrastructure.
Yeah. They were also meant to have they also usually host Tour de France. So yeah, it is.
That's right. Well, and that's one big, one big sort of change this year, of course, about the Tour, because the Tour happens, I think it's early July. And of course, that's been a problem from the perspective of COVID has been a problem for the perspective of the Tour. I must admit, I'm not sure what the Tour is doing this year, whether they're delaying it or whether they're going to run it sort of. I heard talk of them running it behind closed doors, as it were, so no spectators. But I have no idea how you do that, because what happens is when the Tour comes through your region in France, the whole village and the whole town will turn out to watch the peloton, riding through. So how you stop that happening, I have no idea. I don't know what they're going to do with the Tour this year.
Yeah, well, in football, they're starting football. They're starting playing matches again in the Premier League, which is the league in England. On I think it's the 18th or 21st. I'm not sure. But
interesting. Is that? Do you know if they're letting people into the stadiums or is it?
It's going to be on TV.
Okay.
So the team I support, Liverpool, are like 22 points. We're in first place, 22 points ahead of the team in second place, and like haven't won the league in 30 years. So fans, Liverpool fans are like, if we win the league, there'll be like a massive parade. So it's going to be really hard for them to stop that parade.
Wow. Yes, I can imagine. Well, that's exciting. I hadn't. I remember Liverpool always did. They did very well in the 1970s when. Yes, I remember they were consistently top of what was League Division 1 back in those days. Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I hope. Yes. Well, I hope they get it.
Yeah. Surveys have shown an increased appetite for people wanting to avoid public transport post-lockdown, and as a result, an increased demand for car ownership and usage. We all know this comes with its own issues because of carbon emissions. There needs to be an incentive that gets one from A to B and also further. And is it technology that may be the solution through increased investment in e-cycles?
In e-cycles, yes. There are actually quite a lot of people in the cycling community are talking about e-bikes. And they have been quite a catalyst, actually, to get people riding, and perhaps people who wouldn't normally think of themselves as cyclists. In fact, back in 2017, when I was on my long ride from the UK to Norway and back, I came across quite a few e-cyclists, sometimes older people. Quite a few I came across in Germany. And there were older people who maybe they weren't physically, or they're just beginning a journey to fitness, if you like. And the e-bike was perfect for them because it gave them a bit of help going up hills and enabled them to keep up with quicker riders just by turning on a bit of power. Yes, I think they're a positive development, and they could, as you say, encourage people, even if it just encourages a few people to take a few fewer trips in the car, then overall that must have a beneficial effect, I'm sure.
I was interested to learn that in some cities, such as Tel Aviv, people have taken to e-cycles in great numbers and even credit them for allowing them to access places they would have never been before. For example, it offers people who may not be super fit to do a mountain climb that they would not have attempted previously, and as a result unlock some amazing views.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I mean, there's a couple of things you have to just watch out for. Obviously, when you're using an e-bike, is that you need to be careful how you use the power, because of course once you've used up the battery, you have to recharge it. And if you have an e-bike with an empty battery and you're going up a hill, the e-bike is actually quite a bit heavier than a normal bike, so you've got to be a little bit careful. But battery technology is so much better than it was only a few years ago. So I believe they go further than they used to. The other thing is, if you're using it for race training, once you get to a certain speed, I think it's 30 kilometers per hour, the electric assist stops working. So it won't allow you to. It won't give you electrical sort of power assistance above a certain speed. I think it's a safety feature, basically.
Have you tried an e-bike before? You sound like you have.
I've ridden. Yes, I rode one in Hamburg, and I stayed with a friend on my long trip, and he had bought an e-bike for his office, so I tried it out, and that was a lot of fun. I also rode, so my son and I rode e-bikes in Copenhagen. We borrowed them from the hotel we were staying in. And I found out the hard way about flat batteries, because the bike I was using didn't have the battery charged. So I was having to pedal the whole weight of the e-bike with no assistance. So I've personally experienced the difference. But yeah, they're a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, Julian, it's been an absolute pleasure to learn from you today. So before the end of our podcast, I'd like to ask you some random questions.
Please go ahead. Yeah, it's been my pleasure as well. My pleasure, and thank you for having me. So ask away.
Okay. What is the most worthwhile investment you've made? It could be in anything.
Oh, the most worthwhile investment. I instinctively, my mind is moving away from, I'm not thinking of investments in the conventional sense about, like a financial product or something like that. I think I would say the most worthwhile investments I have made have been in terms of personal development. And they might surprise you. The first thing I can think of was learning how to type properly. So when I was at school, my mother made me do a course to learn how to touch type. And that has been incredibly useful in professional life, to be able to type at speed without looking at the keys. The second thing I think was probably the time I put in as a student doing my undergraduate degree, because I studied Arabic. I invested a lot of time and energy into learning the language, and I have never regretted that. And that has given me a life interest, and I'm able to use the language professionally as well. So I think that's probably unusual or unexpected answers, but I think the best investments I've made have been investments of time in learning how to type and working on basically language work. As far as I'm concerned, those are the best investments.
Okay. So what is the best advice you can give someone?
I would say, whatever you're doing, do it to the very best of your ability. So if you're lucky enough to find something that you really enjoy, whether it's music or sport or languages, work, study, whatever it is, commit to it. Do it to the best of your ability. I would say would be, and don't be afraid sometimes to follow your gut feelings. So for example, one of the best investments I made, as I said, I think was working hard at the Arabic language. But it was a gut feeling that would be a good thing to study that led me into studying it. It wasn't a particularly logical choice for someone of my background, but I just had a gut feeling that it would be a good thing to do. So sometimes, just don't be afraid of your gut feeling. If you get the feeling that you think, this is actually a good thing to do, I don't know why, but I think this is going to lead places, don't be afraid to follow that.
Okay. So next, who have you learnt most from?
Who have I learnt most from?
Yeah.
Ooh. That's a difficult one, because I think sometimes you find that you don't realize what you've learned until quite a lot later, and you learn things from sometimes the most surprising people. But I think I'd probably have to say it would be one or two of my teachers at school, whose sort of life lessons have stayed with me even now, on how to organize, how to think and how to organize my time, how to concentrate, how to relax, things like that. So I think I'd have to give the credit to one or two of my teachers at school.
Mm-hmm. For me, I would say. So I recently read a book. It's called Rich Dad Poor Dad. It was by a man called Robert Kiyosaki. he is an author and he owns a couple of businesses. So, and I would also say I'm reading a book right now. It's called Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, and and I'm like halfway through it. I've learned quite a bit about it, about like business and starting a company, because that he basically he explained in the book, ever since he was, I think, 20, his life story since he was 20, when he was setting it up, when he had problems in the business, and it was an autobiography.
Yeah. Interesting. I've heard of Rich Dad Poor Dad. I've heard of that, but I haven't read it. But reading is, I mean, look, it's a very it's an old school pastime, but you can't beat it. I mean, it's really important. And yes, books of whatever it is, whether it's even good literature, novels. You can learn important truths from them as well.
Yeah. As we're talking about books, the final question is, what book have you gifted or recommended the most, and why?
Let's see. Well, I've recently been reading. In fact, it's something I was talking to your dad about. So I've actually been reading some works of philosophy, and I'm actually going back to looking at the Greek philosophers and sort of Greek and Roman, basically, and I'm looking at Seneca at the moment, who's not someone I know very much about, except that he was one of the best known Stoics, and so that I've found very interesting. On a completely different note, I've found the letters of T.E. Lawrence, so Lawrence of Arabia, very, very interesting for what they tell you about the region, the Middle East, and the First World War, and his experience in there. So two very different sort of areas of interest.
Julian, thank you very much for joining us today. It's very much appreciated.